Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to look anywhere but at the imposing figure cutting through the crowd. She'd heard whispers about Henry Castellano, how senators called him for favors, how his family's influence could make problems disappear overnight, how he could change the course of entire political careers with a single conversation. She also heard he was ruthless, untouchable, and completely dangerous to know. So why did her hands shake every time those storm-colored eyes found hers? "Champagne?" she offered weakly to a group of socialites, her voice barely audible over the jazz quartet. "Oh, it's you again," sneered Victoria Pemberton, whose father owned half the real estate in Georgetown. "Try not to spill anything on my Valentino this time, would you?" Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her head down and moved on. She'd dealt with worse than entitled rich girls, like working 3 jobs while caring for her diabetic mother or choosing between groceries and rent every month. "Miss," the voice was like velvet over steel, stopping her dead in her tracks. Emily slowly turned to find Henry standing directly behind her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something dangerously masculine. Up close, he was even more devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a perfectly sculpted jaw with the shadow of stubble, and those eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I'd like a drink," he said quietly, but somehow his voice carried more authority than men who shouted. Emily's mouth went dry. "Of course, sir." "Champagne?" A ghost of a smile played at his lips. "What would you recommend?" She blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked for her opinion about anything at these events. The Dom Perignon is exceptional, but if you prefer something with more character, the Laurent Perrier has beautiful notes of white peach and honey." Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. "Impressive knowledge for a waitress," Emily finished, lifting her chin with dignity despite her burning cheeks. "For anyone," he corrected gently. "I'll take the Laurent Perrier." As she handed him the glass, their fingers brushed, sending an electric shock up her arm. Henry's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the crowded ballroom faded away, until it was just the two of them in their own private bubble. "Henry, darling." Caroline Ashworth, daughter of a Supreme Court justice, materialized at his elbow like a designer-clad ghost. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Daddy wants to discuss that shipping contract." 4 other women quickly flanked them, an ambassador's daughter, a tech heiress, a senator's niece, and a pharmaceutical fortune inheritor. Each was more stunning than the last, dripping in diamonds and desperation. Emily took a step back, suddenly aware of her polyester uniform and scuffed shoes. These women belonged in Henry's world. She was just nobody. "If you'll excuse me," she whispered, preparing to disappear into the crowd. "Stay." The single word was spoken so quietly she almost missed it, but the intensity in Henry's voice made her freeze. He hadn't even looked at the 5 beauties surrounding him. His gaze remained locked on hers. "But, sir, I have work." "Henry," Caroline purred, sliding her manicured hand up his arm. "Surely you have time for old friends." That's when Emily's phone buzzed with an urgent text message. Emily's hands shook as she read the message from her mother's care facility. The words every daughter dreaded flashed across her screen. "Emergency. Your mother's condition has deteriorated. Please come immediately." The champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the marble floor as tears filled her eyes. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My mother, she's—" Before she could finish the sentence, Henry was beside her, his strong hand gently touching her elbow. "What happened?" "Medical emergency," Emily managed through her tears. "I need to get to the hospital, but I don't have a car, and it's too late for public transportation." "I'll take you," Henry said without hesitation. The 5 socialites gasped in unison, their perfectly painted faces showing shock that their golden prince would abandon them for a crying waitress. "Henry, you can't be serious," Victoria protested. "We have the charity auction." "Handle the auction," he said firmly, his attention entirely focused on Emily. "This is more important." As chaos erupted around them with disappointed socialites and confused partygoers, Henry took Emily's hand and led her toward the exit. What Emily didn't know was that his sudden departure would trigger a chain of family obligations and loyalty tests that would change everything. The Porsche Taycan purred through the DC streets like a silver bullet, but Emily barely noticed the luxury surrounding her. Her hands twisted in her lap as she gave Henry directions to Washington Hospital Center. a world away from the private medical facilities his world undoubtedly used. "She's all I have," Emily whispered, staring out at the city lights. "If I lose her—" "You won't." Henry's voice carried absolute certainty that somehow calmed her racing heart. "I promise you won't." Emily wanted to ask how he could possibly make such a promise, but something in his tone suggested this was a man who never made vows lightly. She glanced at him in the driver's seat. Jacket gone, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, to reveal forearms marked with scars that told stories she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Henry's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Because the moment I saw you tonight, everything changed." The simplicity of his admission stole her breath. No flowery words or dramatic declarations, just truth spoken with the quiet intensity that seemed to define everything about him. At the hospital, Henry insisted on handling the paperwork while Emily rushed to her mother's room. She found Margaret Chen unconscious in the ICU, looking fragile and pale against the stark white sheets. Emily sank into the bedside chair she'd occupied countless times over the years, taking her mother's cold hand in both of hers. "I'm sorry, Mum," she whispered. "I should have been here. I should have checked your blood sugar before I left for work. The night shift nurse says she's responding well to treatment." Emily looked up to find Henry in the doorway, his massive frame somehow managing not to overwhelm the small hospital room. He'd removed his tie completely, and she could see genuine concern etched in his features. "You spoke to the nurse?" "I spoke to the doctor." Henry moved into the room with careful, quiet steps. "Dr. Harrison will be monitoring her personally through the night. They're adjusting her medications and running additional tests." Emily's eyes widened. "Dr. Harrison? He's the chief of endocrinology. I could never afford—" "It's taken care of." "Henry, no, I can't let you—" "Emily." He pulled up another chair, positioning it close enough to her that their knees almost touched. "When was the last time you ate?" The question caught her off guard. What? Food. When did you last eat?" She tried to remember through the fog of exhaustion and worry. "Breakfast, I think. Maybe yesterday?" Henry's jaw tightened with controlled anger. Not at her, but at the circumstances that had forced someone so young to carry such heavy burdens. "Stay with your mother. I'll be right back." 15 minutes later, he returned with a bag from the hospital cafeteria. Soup, sandwiches, fruit and coffee that actually smelled decent. "You don't have to take care of me," Emily protested, even as her stomach growled traitorously. "Yes, I do." He said it with such simple conviction that she didn't know how to argue. As she ate, Henry sat quietly beside her, his presence both comforting and unsettling. She'd never had someone just be there for her. No expectations, no demands, just steady support when she needed it most. "Tell me about her," Henry said eventually, nodding toward Margaret. Emily's face softened as she looked at her mother. "She's a nurse, worked double shifts for 20 years to put herself through school after my father left. She taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you have, but from how you treat people." Smart woman. She used to say that kindness was the only luxury that didn't cost anything. Emily smiled sadly. She never met a stray person she couldn't help. Like mother, like daughter. Their eyes met across the small space, and Emily felt that same electric connection from the ballroom, only deeper now, more real. "You don't know me, Henry. I know you stayed calm under pressure. I know you've been working yourself to exhaustion to care for someone you love." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And I know that when 5 of the most eligible women in Washington were throwing themselves at me tonight, the only person I wanted to talk to was a waitress who recommended champagne like she was discussing fine art." Emily's breath caught. "Henry—" That's when Henry's phone rang with a call that would change everything. Marcus, Henry's most trusted advisor, appeared in the doorway with barely contained urgency in his expression. "Boss, we need to talk. Now. The family council is demanding answers about tonight." Henry was instantly alert, his demeanor shifting subtly but noticeably. "What kind of answers?" "The kind that questions your priorities," Marcus said carefully, glancing at Emily. "Your Uncle Vincent is concerned about recent decisions." Emily felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees as she realized she was witnessing something she probably shouldn't. Henry's jaw tightened, and she caught a glimpse of the man who commanded respect through sheer force of will. "Tell Vincent that my personal life is not up for family discussion," Henry said quietly, but his voice carried unmistakable authority. "With respect, boss," leaving the charity gala with— Marcus paused delicately. Someone outside the usual circle has raised questions about judgment and loyalty. Emily started to stand, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. I should go. Sit down, Henry said firmly, but when he looked at her, his expression softened. Please, Emily, don't let family politics drive you away. This is what I meant, Emily whispered, understanding dawning. This is the choice, isn't it? Your world, your family's expectations, they don't include people like me. Henry looked between Marcus and Emily, his face a mask of controlled conflict. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, torn between the loyalty that had defined his entire life and something new that he was only beginning to understand. Give us a moment, Henry told Marcus, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear this wasn't a request. Marcus nodded reluctantly and stepped into the hallway, leaving Henry and Emily alone with the weight of unspoken complications hanging between them. I need to tell you something, Henry said, moving his chair closer to hers, about who I am, what my family expects, and why tonight has created complications. Emily's heart hammered as she prepared herself for whatever revelation was coming. My family. We're not just wealthy, Emily. We're what you might call a traditional Italian-American organization. We have codes, rules, expectations that have guided us for generations. What kind of organization? Emily asked quietly, though part of her already suspected the answer. The kind where loyalty to family comes before everything else, where your personal choices reflect on everyone who shares your name, where falling for a woman outside our world isn't just frowned upon, it's seen as a betrayal of everything we stand for. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. You're talking about the Mafia. Henry's silence was answer enough. My God, Emily whispered. You're really, I heard whispers, but I thought you were just a powerful businessman. I am a businessman, Henry said quickly. Most of what we do now is legitimate. Real estate, construction, some political consulting. But yes, we're what people call the family. And that means there are expectations, obligations, people who depend on our protection and influence. Emily tried to process this information, her mind racing through everything she thought she knew about him. The hospital, Dr. Harrison. That wasn't just money, was it? That was influence. Emily, I need you to understand something. Henry's voice was urgent now. What I feel for you, what's happening between us, it goes against everything my family believes about duty and tradition. They think emotions make you weak, that love outside the family makes you vulnerable. And what do you think? Henry reached for her hands, his touch gentle despite the strength she could feel beneath his fingers. I think that for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to want something more than power or respect or family approval. Before Emily could respond, Margaret's eyes fluttered open. Emily? Her mother called weakly. Emily rushed to her side, taking her hand. I'm here, Mom, I'm right here. Margaret's gaze focused, then drifted to Henry standing respectfully at the foot of the bed. Her eyes widened with a recognition that made Emily's blood run cold. Henry Castellano, Margaret whispered. I know exactly who you are. The bottom dropped out of Emily's world as she realized her mother knew about Henry's family and what that meant for both of them. Mom? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. How do you know him? Margaret struggled to sit up, her eyes never leaving Henry's face. 25 years ago, I was a trauma nurse at George Washington University Hospital. I treated all kinds of cases. Car accidents, workplace injuries, emergency surgeries for people who couldn't always go to regular doctors. Henry remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but Emily noticed his hands had clenched into fists at his sides. One night, Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger, they brought in a 15-year-old boy. Critical injuries, massive blood loss. He was dying. She looked at Henry with something between sadness and respect. But he never made a sound, never cried out, never asked for help, just stared at the ceiling with these steel-gray eyes and gave me a fake name. Emily's heart stopped. She looked at Henry, seeing him differently now, not just as the powerful man from tonight, but as that wounded boy her mother had fought to save. I worked on him for 14 hours, Margaret said quietly. Lost him twice on the table, but something about that kid, he had a will to live that I'd never seen before. And more importantly, he never once threatened me or tried to make me afraid, even though I knew what family he came from. Mrs. Chen saved my life, Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. When I woke up, she was sitting beside my bed reading a nursing textbook. She didn't ask questions about how I got hurt or who was responsible. She just told me that life had given me a second chance, and what I did with it would define the kind of man I became. Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks as the pieces fell into place. That's why you could make the calls. Why Dr. Harrison came personally. I've been looking for a way to repay your mother for 25 years, Henry admitted. She never would accept money or favors. Said the only payment she wanted was for me to use my influence to help people, instead of just helping myself. Margaret smiled sadly. But you were born into a world that doesn't always give you that choice, weren't you, Henry? No, ma'am, not until tonight. His gaze moved to Emily with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not until I met someone who made me want to find another way. Emily. Margaret took her daughter's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. This man comes from a world where love is seen as weakness, where caring about someone outside the family is considered betrayal. People in his position don't get to choose happiness over duty. Mum, I've seen what happens to good people who get caught up in this life, Margaret continued urgently. The pressure, the constant danger of disappointing the wrong people, the impossible choices. I would never let anything happen to her. Henry's voice cut through Margaret's words. I would leave everything behind before I let Emily get hurt, because of who my family is. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Margaret replied sadly, and what they're afraid of too. Emily looked between them, her heart breaking. Just hours ago, her biggest worry was making rent. Now she was caught between the mother who'd sacrificed everything for her and a man who'd somehow become essential to her breathing, a man whose very existence challenged everything his family had taught him to believe. I need some air, Emily whispered, standing abruptly. She escaped to the hospital chapel, a small interfaith space that was mercifully empty at 3 a.m. Emily sank into a pew and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The man who'd protected her tonight, who'd held her hand like it was precious, who'd moved heaven and earth to save her mother. He was also someone whose family saw love as a liability. Mind if I join you? Emily looked up to find Henry in the doorway, his jacket folded over his arm, looking more human and vulnerable than she'd seen him all night. It's a chapel, she said quietly. Everyone's welcome. He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. Your mother is right, you know, about the expectations, about the choices people in my position have to make. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to be honest with you. Henry stared at the simple wooden cross at the front of the room. I've had to make difficult decisions, Emily. I've had to prioritize family loyalty over personal desires, maintain relationships that served our interests rather than my heart, make choices that protected our organization even when it meant sacrificing what I wanted. Emily studied his profile, the sharp angles of his face, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. But you also saved my mother's life tonight. You abandoned your family's expectations to help someone you barely knew. You're sitting here questioning everything you were raised to believe. That doesn't erase 25 years of conditioning. Maybe not, Emily agreed, but it shows me who you're choosing to become. Henry turned to look at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. You're not running. Should I be? Yes, he said immediately. You should get as far away from me and my world as possible. Find some nice college professor who can give you the normal life you deserve. Emily felt her heart crack. Is that what you want? For me to find someone else? The raw pain that flashed across Henry's face answered her question before he spoke. What I want doesn't matter. What's best for you? What if what's best for me is my choice to make? Emily interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Emily, 25 years ago you were a hurt, scared boy who could have died on my mother's operating table. Tonight you were a man who chose to help a stranger instead of maintaining appearances. She turned to face him fully. People aren't just one thing, Henry. They're not just their family's expectations or their worst fears. They're the sum of every choice they make. Henry looked at her like she was something miraculous he couldn't quite believe was real. You're going to change everything, he said quietly. What do you mean? Everything I thought I knew about what I could have, what I deserved. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Emily, if you choose this, choose me. There's no going back. My world is complicated, full of people who would see our relationship as evidence that I've lost focus, lost respect for tradition. And your world is also full of people who've watched you honor your debts for 25 years, Emily replied, covering his hands with hers. People who've seen you grow from that 15-year-old boy into a man who keeps his promises. How can you have so much faith in someone you've known for one night? Emily smiled, leaning into his touch. Sometimes one night is all it takes to recognize home. Henry's control finally cracked. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched, his breathing uneven. Emily, The chapel door opened, and Marcus appeared with barely contained urgency. Boss, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a real problem. Vincent called another family meeting. He's questioning your judgment publicly now. There are murmurs about leadership. Henry was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerable man to the head of a powerful family. How serious? Serious enough that if you don't address this soon, there could be challenges to your authority. The old guard doesn't understand why you'd risk family stability for personal complications. Henry turned to Emily, his face showing the terrible weight of choosing between two worlds. This is what I meant. This is the choice. Emily stood slowly, her heart hammering but her resolve steady. Then, we need to figure out how to make them understand. Henry stared at her in disbelief. I told you, Emily said, taking his hand despite Marcus's shocked expression. I'm choosing you. All of you, including the parts that come with complications. The ride to Henry's family compound was silent, but Emily could feel the tension radiating from both Henry and Marcus. They weren't going to his estate, they were going to face the council that had controlled Henry's life since birth. Are you sure about this? Henry asked her for the 10th time as they approached the imposing gates of the Castellano family home. Are you sure about me? Emily countered. Henry's hand tightened on hers. More sure than I've ever been about anything. The compound was impressive but not ostentatious, old money elegance that spoke of power exercised quietly. As they walked toward the main house, Emily caught glimpses of the life Henry had grown up in. Family photos spanning generations, symbols of tradition and loyalty, the weight of expectations carved into every stone. Stay close, Henry murmured as they approached the door where several serious-looking men waited. Henry, Vincent Castellano, was a man in his 60s with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. I'm surprised you brought company to a family meeting. Emily isn't company, Henry said firmly. She's the woman I intend to marry. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt every pair of eyes on her, measuring, judging, finding her lacking. Nephew, Vincent said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No. Henry's voice carried absolute authority. Emily is part of this conversation because she's part of my life. Permanently. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense interrogation Emily had ever experienced. Questions about her background, her intentions, her understanding of what it meant to be connected to their family. Through it all, Henry never wavered in his support, never suggested she was temporary or negotiable. Finally, Vincent asked the question Emily had been dreading. What makes you think you're worth the risk to everything we've built? Emily took a deep breath, thinking of her mother's words about dignity and kindness. I don't think I'm worth more than your family's legacy, Mr. Castellano, but I think Henry is worth the chance to build something new while honoring what came before. I think he's spent 25 years proving he can be trusted with responsibility, and maybe it's time to trust him with happiness too. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Vincent turned to Henry. You're willing to stake your leadership on this woman? I'm willing to stake everything on her, Henry replied without hesitation. 3 months later, Emily stood in the garden of Henry's estate, wearing a dress that had cost more than she used to make in a year, surrounded by a wedding party that included senators and Supreme Court justices, alongside hospital workers and fellow waitresses. The ceremony had been a masterpiece of diplomacy, traditional enough to satisfy family expectations, personal enough to reflect who they really were. Margaret walked her down the aisle, her health fully restored and her pride evident. Vincent Castellano served as Henry's best man, his acceptance of their union complete if not entirely enthusiastic. As Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, Emily marveled at the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There had been family tensions, social adjustments, and moments when the pressure of two worlds colliding had seemed overwhelming. But there had also been moments of pure joy, like when Henry's teenage cousin Sophia had started calling Emily her honorary sister, like when the family had rallied to support Margaret's medical needs without question, like when Henry had created a foundation in her name to help working families afford medical care. Mrs. Castellano, Henry murmured against her ear, as they swayed to their first dance as husband and wife. "I like the sound of that," Emily replied, looking up at the man who'd chosen love over fear, who'd found a way to honor both his family's traditions and his own heart. 2 years later, Emily stood in the nursery of their Virginia home, rocking their 6-month-old daughter Sophia Margaret Castellano to sleep. The little girl had Henry's gray eyes and Emily's stubborn chin, and she was absolutely adored by everyone from her grandfather Vincent to the security team who took turns babysitting. Henry appeared in the doorway, still in his suit from a family meeting, but his face transformed with pure joy at the sight of his wife and daughter. "How did it go?" Emily asked softly. "Good. Vincent officially announced his retirement. The transition will be complete by Christmas." Emily smiled. Henry had spent the last 2 years carefully modernizing the family operations, moving them completely into legitimate businesses, while maintaining the loyalty and protection that had always been their strength. It hadn't been easy, but it had been possible, especially with a family council that had grown to respect Emily's insights and Henry's vision. And the foundation approved. Full family backing for the expansion into 3 more cities. Emily had used her position to create something beautiful, a network of medical support for working families that combined the Castellano family's resources with her understanding of what people really needed. It had become Vincent's favorite project, giving him a way to honor his late wife's memory while supporting his nephew's wife. "I love you, Emily Castellano," Henry said, settling into the chair beside her. "I love you too," she replied, thinking about their daughter and the life they were building together. "All of you." Outside, the Virginia hills rolled toward the horizon, peaceful and full of possibility. And in the nursery that smelled of baby powder and hope, a former waitress and a reformed don planned their future together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one love at a time. Sometimes the most powerful love stories weren't about changing who you were. They were about finding someone worth becoming better for. This incredible journey of love that conquered all expectations has come to an end.